So let me read for you in Exodus chapter 20. Let me read for you what God commands in this fourth commandment. By the way, we had 2 commandments this morning, 4 and 5. The honor your father and mother. I figured, why would I waste this when Mother's Day is just around the corner? We'll preach that commandment on Mother's Day, okay? We'll talk about that on Mother's Day. So let's zoom in on that fourth commandment instead of the fifth. But let me read you Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. God says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. This is the word of the Lord, and we thank God for his word. Do you know what Sabbath means? It's a good question, isn't it? Doing my word study, was going through and looked up the word Sabbath. And there's 2 primary ways that Sabbath is used in the Old Testament, this word Sabbath we see. Usually it's used to refer to the Sabbath. Or we, in the New Testament, called it the Lord's Day. By the way, does anybody know why we call it the Lord's Day and not Sabbath? Absolutely. So early in the church history, where the Jews would celebrate on Saturday, the church looked at the day that we see the resurrection, or Resurrection Sunday, which is coming in April, the way we're going to celebrate it. We started celebrating the Lord's Day. And that's why we call it the Lord's Day. So we need to recognize that even when we talk about Sabbath, what you and I think of as Sabbath when we come to church on Sunday morning isn't the same thing that God commanded his people, the Israelites, to celebrate on Sabbath. Are they going to relate to one another? Absolutely. Are the ideas of Sabbath going to teach us what it looks like to celebrate the Lord's Day well? Absolutely. But remember, they're not exactly the same thing. They're not exactly the same thing. Your German Shepherd may look like a wolf. It's not a wolf. In fact, if you try and tame a wolf, you're going to find very quickly they're not like German Shepherds. They may look alike. They're not exactly the same. We need to understand Sabbath so we can celebrate the Lord's Day well. So as we hear the commandment given in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11, how do we get to understand what Sabbath looks like from this passage? I actually want to ask you, how do we do good Bible study? How do we do Bible study well? If you had Exodus 28 through 11 sitting in front of you and you want to understand what it meant, how would you do that? Well, we already took the first step. You'd read it, right? We'd ask you to read it. So we would read, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord, your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor daughter, nor male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For 6 days in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath, and he made it holy. So you've read the passage you want to study, and we're trying to study about Sabbath. And as you go through, you'll realize that some words are really, really important to understanding this passage. Some of these words, I need to know what they mean. And other words sort of unpack what those central words mean. There are foundation words. There are words that they're the ones we really need to get a hold of. And then there are other words that sort of help us understand what those foundation words mean. So, for example, when it starts talking about who should rest on the Sabbath, it's an explanation of what Sabbath is going to look like practically. So when we get a little bit further in, when we start in verse 10, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord on your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your animals, or any foreigner residing in your town. So God is explaining to us, listen, this applies to you, and it applies to your kids, it applies to your neighbors, it applies to your cart horse. This is who this command applies to. That's an unpacking. But as we read this, I would say there's probably 3 or 4 words in the verses I just read for you that if we want to understand Sabbath, we need to understand what those words mean. So let me read it for you. Let me just read for you verses 8 and 9. And are there any words in these verses that you need to understand if you want to get an idea of what Sabbath means? God says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Now, Sabbath, I mentioned it means Sabbath. It means this sort of special day set apart. Sabbath can also stand for a season or cycle. So there's time where they'll use the word Sabbath just refer to a week, right? It's the start of the week, or that one weekly unit. So the word Sabbath, we're trying to understand it. That's obviously the main word, the central word. But what other words did I read in that passage that we need to understand?
Holy.
Okay, so what does it mean for something to be holy?
Set aside.
Set aside. Donna, you're taking the wind right out of my... You got all the answers. That's okay. I'd rather you know the answers than not know the answers. So that's good. But that's exactly right. We had a joke read last night at our chili cook-off. And which kind of cheese is the most religious cheese? It's Swiss cheese, right? Because it's holy. I was waiting for the response on that one. I guess that's... Holy doesn't mean full of holes in this case, right? Holy means that it's set apart, it's different. That has a special and unique purpose. So, for example, we read in the New Testament that once during a prayer meeting of the church, the Spirit of God moved, and it told the church, you are to set apart these two men I have chosen. I have a special job for them. I want you to pray for them, and I want you to send them on a missionary trip. I want you to set aside Paul and Barnabas. I am setting them apart for a special job. God sanctified them. He said, they are different. I have a purpose for them. I am making them holy in this case. So it's something that is set apart, that is different from all the others. You might have at your house, do you have the good china at home? We got kids instead of nice plates, because those two things don't seem to exist in the same space, at least not with my kids, right? Like they're fine china. But do you have stuff at home that you only use for certain purposes? You get it out when it's a special occasion? We actually do have special dishes we use for Christmas or for Easter. Those things are set apart for a purpose. You don't use them every day. So that's this day, this Sabbath is holy, it's different, it's set apart. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. What's another word in that pair of verses that we need to understand? Talk about Sabbath, talk about holy. How about labor? Do you know what labor is? Well, yeah, Donna, I gave you a hard time. Keep answering questions. Tell you what, I'll pick on Josh again. That way you can feel it easier. You got a group over there together. But don't we need to know what labor is? 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day, it's a Sabbath of the Lord, so you're not supposed to work. So what is it you're supposed to stop doing? Isn't that an important question? You can't keep Sabbath if you don't know what sets it apart from the other 6 days. That's the whole point. This word that we translate labor in English is a fascinating one. Now, I'm going to begin this by reminding all of you, I'm not a Hebrew scholar primarily. I learned Hebrew. That's great. You might be able to tell me what the offside rule is in soccer. That doesn't mean you're ready to play for a Premier League team, right? You understand the difference there? You may have been to a hockey game. That doesn't mean you could play for the Maple Leafs.
Well, probably you could.
Well, so I thought that was too low-hanging fruit to make a joke this morning, especially after the loss of the Predators last night. Oh. Right? Just because you've got some familiarity, it doesn't make you an expert. So what I say here, it is through the study from other people, and we're just going to try and get an idea, a flavor for it. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you, I can tell you all the ins and outs of Hebrew grammar or the lexical, the lexical fine points of it. But we can get a little bit of idea if we just open up a dictionary, if we open up our lexicon, if we do a little bit of study in good commentaries. So what we find when we look at this Hebrew word for labor is actually really interesting because it's connected to this idea of being a servant or being a slave. They share a root in the Hebrew. This is work. This is service. Another word you might use for it is toil. Do you know what toil is? Isn't it interesting that you probably had a different emotional reaction to the word toil than you had to work? Did you? I do. If someone says, come on down, we got to work together, or someone says, come on, we're going to toil together, those don't sound like the same thing to me. 6 days you will serve, you will work. And actually, if you want to get to the heart of it, if you want, you can turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 5. There's a slight difference in the way that the 10 words are given in Deuteronomy chapter 5. God starts out very similarly. He says in verse 12, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor, there it is, and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, your son, your daughter, your male, your female servant, your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now, in this passage, God connects the idea that your servants aren't supposed to work. You're not supposed to rest while they work. That's not the idea. But he reminds the people that they were slaves in Egypt, and God delivered them from that slavery. And what is fascinating about that word slaves is that is the same root as the word toil. We are not slaves on the Sabbath. We are free to rest on the Sabbath. In fact, not only are we free to rest, we are commanded to rest. You fail to keep the law of God when you toil when you should be resting. To sort of drive that home, and as we're talking about important words we need to understand from these verses, at the end of verse 9, it says, on those 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. It's a different word used for work there than what we talked about with labor. The work is that sort of everyday routine, those things that just need to be done. There's a pile of dishes sitting for me waiting when I get home. Please give me some credit. I didn't say they were waiting for my wife. I said I was going to do them when I got home, right? Now she's going to remind me of that when we get home too. There's a pile of dishes waiting for us when we get home, right? Did you notice that every time you have a meal, dishes seem to pile up beside the sink? You got to do them. When you wake up in the morning, there's teeth to be brushed. There's a body to, get in the shower and get ready for the day. There's clothes you have to put on. Then you have to you got a hole in your sock, so you need to either darn the sock or find it. Then you got to get up and you go to work. And how many things in your day are routine, regular, grind sort of things that need to be done, and they're just necessary daily things. We have pets at our house. Oh man, do we have pets at our house. We have 3 dogs. We have 4 cats. I have 3 fish tanks on the go right now. Do you know that every single day, dogs need to go for the walk? Food needs to be put out for them. The cats need to have their litter box changed. The fish need to be fed. There's this work, there's this toil, there's this routine, the daily necessary things. You have 6 days to slave and serve, to do those things that must be done. And on the 7th day, everything is to change, is to be set apart. We are to rest. Which is the one other word I want to point out. It comes at the end, closer to the conclusion of this command. On verse 11, it says, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Now this is going to be, first let me point out, the sort of pattern for 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, God built this into the way the world is. He built this into creation. God sets the example. He is the first one to follow the pattern of 6 days of labor and 1 day of rest. God set that pattern at the beginning. And so we are to follow his example. That's what it says, right? For in the 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The reason we keep the holiness, the reason we set aside the Sabbath day, is because God first set aside the Sabbath day. We're following his example. But I want to point out that there's a big difference in the application of it, or the necessity of it, when it comes to our turn to celebrate the Sabbath day. God could have worked on the 7th day, and it would not have affected him at all. Have you ever watched little children at play and thought, I wish I had energy like that? Have you? where most of us are getting old, and we can remember what it was like to have all sorts of energy. I like to point out that when I was young, I had all sorts of energy and enthusiasm, but I lacked the wisdom. Now that I'm getting older, I'm starting to learn the wisdom, but I lack the enthusiasm and the energy to apply it properly. But you look at a little child, and they run, and they run, and they run. And actually, one of our little ones hated going to bed. And they'd put an object, and I think it was a chair, in the middle of the living room, in the kitchen, or wherever they were, and they would run around, and they'd say, I'm running in circles, I'm running in circles, I'm running in circles, and they just do that until they eventually collapsed, and they were asleep. Because they hated going to sleep, and they wanted to go, 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 go. Even more than a toddler, God has boundless, limitless, infinite energy. Okay, he didn't get to the end of day 6, and he's created the light and the dark, and he's created, these seas and the dry land. He's created the sky and the waters above him, and he's filled all these things. He's filled the sea, he's filled the dry land, he's created the plants, and he finally gets to creating the animals, then he creates the people, and he looks at them and says, wow, I'm exhausted. I just have to take tomorrow off. He didn't say that, because God is limitless, which is why it's so fascinating that he said, you know what? I'm taking day 7 off. He did it as a pattern for us to follow. But when we take the 7th day off, we don't do it we do it because God's commanded it. But there's also a very practical side to this. You cannot go forever. In fact, just like my child used to run in circles until they collapsed, you too will fall down. Period. There's not a single person in this room right now that can keep going and going and going and going. You know the mascot, right? That battery brand that has the rabbit that just keeps going and going and going. That is false advertising. I bought those batteries. They do wear out. I have a whole bucket of them at home that no longer work. You are just like that little rabbit. You can go and you can go, and you can even stretch. Have you ever been in a place where you had to just stretch beyond your comfort zone, where you were already so exhausted that there was another mile to go, there was another thing that just had to be done before bedtime, and you stretched and you stretched and you stretched and you reached it finally? Ever been on a car trip like that? You're exhausted, but there's still a few hours to go. By the way, if you're ever in that situation, there are like hotels everywhere. You're way better to stop for the night than fall asleep behind the wheel. Yeah, my wife is looking at me like, why don't you listen to me when I say that? Because they pay me to say smart things here. They don't pay me to do things in my yeah. You will wear out. You will run out. God says, I know that about you. I made you. Here is a gift. Here is a gift. Rest. But there's another interesting thing about this passage. In 6 days, the Lord God made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Do you remember the tone and the attitude of what happened on the 7th day? Let me read it for you. Verse 31 of Genesis chapter 1, it says, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. On the 7th day, God had finished his work that had been done. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work, and he made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work and the creation that he had done. And there's almost this idea that God has done it. He's put the finishing touches on it. A master painter putting the final brushstroke on it, and he steps back and says, wow. This is just how I want it to be. And he steps back. The word rested, by the way, in the Hebrew, has this idea of ceasing, stopping, staying where you are. It's the cessation of activity or movement. And we get almost this picture in Genesis chapters 1 and 2 of God stepping back and saying, I'm just going to take a day and enjoy what I've done. It's very good. You see, that's the heart of Sabbath. That's the heart of Sabbath. You have labored for 6 days. It's time to rest. It's time to enjoy the good things God has done. It's time to enjoy the good things we have done. We find, can I give you the 2 examples? Here's our big idea for the day. God gives us 6 days to work diligently on things that matter. 6 days for you to work diligently on things that matter. And Sabbath means enjoying the fruit of that labor as we worship the God who restores our weary hearts. If I was to give sort of a definition of what this commandment means, I think I'd give you something like that. Well, I am being asked to give you a definition of what the Sabbath means. That's what I'm giving you. He gives us 6 days to work diligently on things that matter. And the Sabbath day means enjoying the fruit of that labor as we worship the God who restores weary hearts. And we see two passages specifically in Scripture, two stories in the Bible where this goes wrong. And the first one I want to point you to is in the book of Numbers. It says in Numbers chapter 15, starting in verse 32, while the Israelites were in the desert, a man was found gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Is this good? Is this going to be a good story? No, because we hear a lawbreaker right at the beginning. Well, I shouldn't say that. What we're going to hear is that God's people are actually really excited. They have a passion to see God's law carried out. That they want to be faithful to Him. So this man was found gathering wood on the Sabbath. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly, and they kept him in custody because it was not clear what should be done to him. They know he's broken a law. They know he's disobeyed God, but what should our response be? Then the Lord said to Moses, the man must pay a fine. No. The man must spend a few days in jail. No. The man must die. The whole assembly must stone him outside the camp. So the assembly took him outside the camp and stoned him to death as the Lord God commanded Moses. Doesn't that seem like an overreaction to you? Well, you're wrong. I'm wrong. What seems like, he's just going out to gather some sticks so he can build a fire. He's just going out to get some wood so he can bake something, so he can keep the place warm. It's not just gathering wood. God has made the Sabbath day holy. When you take something that God has made holy and you treat it as if it was common, who are you defying? The God who made it holy. We serve idols all the time that tell us you need to work and to work and to work and to hustle. Do you think the idols, do you think the same motivation that was in this man's heart, do you think it has died out and we no longer suffer from it today? I think it's worse today than it ever was. It's way worse today than it ever was. Have you never heard people talking about all of their side hustles, all the ways they're squeezing every ounce of opportunity? Because if you want to get ahead, you've got to work and work and work and work. Work ethic is an important theme in Scripture. Paul says you need to work hard so you'll have something to share with those who are in need. The book of Proverbs says lazy people suffer because they're lazy. But God says, don't you dare let work become an idol for you. Because if you serve it before you serve me, you've lost what you had in me. We just talked about the fact that God said, I am the Lord your God, you will have no other gods before me. If you think that on Sunday there's another opportunity for you to get a little bit further ahead by treating what God has called holy a common thing, you are serving an idol and you are not honoring God. The one danger we have with Sabbath is that we will treat what God has called holy as if it was a common thing and use it however we want. That's the one danger. Jesus encounters another danger in Matthew chapter 12. At that time, it says, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. He answered, haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, he and his companions, and they ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple desecrate the day and yet are innocent? I tell you that one greater than the temple is here. If you had known that what these words mean, I desire I desire mercy, not sacrifice. You would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So, we see Jesus and the disciples are walking along the grain fields. The disciples pick some grain. They eat it as they're walking along. And some Pharisees see them and say, look, they are harvesting grain on the Sabbath. Now, I, for years, got this story backwards. Because Jesus says, well, listen, here are examples of people who didn't follow the rules and yet are not condemned for their actions. The story about David is fascinating. I'm not going to get into it, but it's an interesting story. They eat consecrated bread that God specifically commanded for the priests and the Levites to have, that they weren't supposed to, David didn't have a share in. I'm not going to get into that story. That's for another time. But look at the second example Jesus gives. He says, look, your priests were commanded to serve on the temple on the Sabbath day. So hold on a second. Isn't that breaking the Sabbath? According to your rules, guys, they're breaking the Sabbath. Go get them. Go shout at your priest. He's working on the Sabbath. And I thought in my mind as I read that passage, when Jesus said, I am Lord of the Sabbath, I'm greater than the temple, I thought what he was saying is, as I call people to me, I am going to reinterpret Sabbath for you. The Sabbath is bendable, it's flexible. See these other examples of exceptions to the rule? And I used to think that what Jesus was saying here was, listen, these rules, they're not rigid, they're not to straitjacket you. There's some flexibility in these. I used to think that's what he was saying. That's wrong. That's not what he's saying here. He's not saying that you can bend the Sabbath to meet your needs or to fit your situation. Actually, that's the opposite of what Jesus is saying. What he's saying in this passage is, you guys are trying to impose your version of what Sabbath looks like on other people. But you're not Lord of the Sabbath. Do you hear what I mean by that? These guys went around the countryside saying, we interpret Sabbath, we define Sabbath, we will tell you what Sabbath looks like, and you will follow our rules, or we will call you a traitor to the living God. They, in fact, decided that they were lords of the Sabbath. And the irony was that Saturday, they met the real Lord of the Sabbath and tried to put him straight. There's a story, I don't know if it's true or not, it's about Sir Edmund Hillary. Does anybody know who Edmund Hillary was? Anyone? He was a mountain climber. One of the first guys to go to the top of Mount Everest. And there was once a tourist, again, I'm not sure if this is an apocryphal story or an apocryphal story or not, but it illustrates the point really well, so we're gonna hope it's true. As a parable, it works just as well, because the point isn't its historicity, but the idea that comes behind it. Edmund Hillary was once said to have been, just in a marketplace, a public space one day, and there was a couple of tourists, and they were there, and they all asked to take a picture. They recognized Edmund Hillary. Like, oh, can we get a picture with you? And there was somebody walking past, and they said to the stranger, oh, can you take a picture of us with this gentleman? And the guy who was walking past obviously didn't recognize Sir Edmund Hillary, didn't know who these people were, but said, yeah, I'll take your photo. And he sat down, and he got ready to take the photo in there, and the folks said, oh, we're getting a picture with the great Edmund Hillary. And they got him an ice axe, and they handed him the ice axe, and so here he is, his arms around them with an ice axe in his hand, and the person taking the photo said, oh, just 1 second, you're holding that ice axe wrong. And he went to the man who had climbed Everest, the man whose name is written in history books, and he said, here's the right way to hold an ice axe. And as the story goes, the humility of Sir Edmund Hillary, he just let the correction go. He said, thank you, thanks for the correction. He let them take a picture and walked away. But can you imagine the audacity of just some random guy saying to this expert, to this one who had done what so few have done in the past, so few have done since then? He came and he said, you're doing it wrong, having no idea who he was talking to. As ridiculous as that story is, on this Sabbath day, these Pharisees went to Jesus and they said, you don't understand what Sabbath is like. They said to the one who was there when the Father said, it's very good. Way back in Genesis chapter 1. Jesus the Son of God, the eternal Son of God, was there when Sabbath was born. And they said to him, Jesus, you really don't get it. They shouldn't be picking grain on the Sabbath. What's worse is that the story continues. Going on from that place, he went to their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there, just looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. They asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? He said to them, if any one of you has a sheep who falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So he said to the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched out his hand, and he was completely restored, just as sound as the other one had been. But the Pharisees went out, and they plotted how they might kill Jesus. Do you know what my problem is? My real problem is with Sabbath? I will not let Jesus be Lord of the Sabbath. I want to be Lord of the Sabbath. I want to decide this is what it should look like. I want to decide this is how I spend my time off. God gave us 6 days to work diligently on things that matter, and Sabbath means enjoying the fruit of that 6 days of labor and worshiping the God who restores weary hearts. I don't have an answer to the mental health crisis that we're currently in the middle of. Go to a high school sometime and just talk to the kids about how they're doing. I have never heard so much anxiety from a group of people. I don't know that there's ever been a time where our young people, our youth, the next generation that's coming up behind us, have been so aware of the necessity of mental health, good mental health, and yet felt so unable to achieve it. Do you understand what I mean by that? There's so much talk about how important it is to care for ourselves, to be healthy in our mind and heart, and yet seen so much despair in terms of actually achieving that. I don't have an answer like that I can give you, like, if we'll all just do this, then we'll be fine. But can I tell you that this Sabbath principle has to be part of it? We are given 6 days to work hard. Work hard on things that matter. If your problem is you don't know how to invest for 6 days in things that matter, do that first. Okay? Some of us here this morning, when we hear Sabbath instruction, we actually need to hear the negative before we hear the positive. And what I mean by that is we need to understand that God gave us 6 days for work. If you work 2.5 days and then hide for the rest, you're not ready to celebrate Sabbath on the seventh day. You're not. You won't appreciate it. What fruit do you have to enjoy for 2.5 days' work? You don't have any left because you ate it on the other days where you were supposed to be working. But when it comes to rest, when it comes to salvation, when we talk about Jesus, what he brings to us, Jesus doesn't just come to give you something someday, somewhere. Do you ever hear the gospel preached like that? Believe in Jesus and one day you'll go to heaven. Is that true? Yes, that's true. But I should have seen more people nodding than that. Yes, that is in the gospel. I've read it somewhere. Jesus says, believe in me and you will go to heaven one day. That is true. Is that the full gospel? No, not even close. Does anybody know what comes at the end of Matthew chapter 11? We looked at Matthew chapter 12. Does anybody remember how Matthew chapter 11 ended? You do. You just don't remember that you do. Matthew 11:28 says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Do you think, Matthew, it's just coincidence that after that statement, he talks about Sabbath? No. Jesus came into this world. The God of creation came into this world, a little baby. And he worked when it was time to work. And he rested in his Father when it was time to rest in his Father. Everything you have ever failed to do, Jesus did right. And he says, you know what? Come to me and I will give you what you need. I will give you rest. I will give you life, not someday, but now. His promise is that he died so we could live, and that life begins today if we'll take hold of it. It's useless to talk about following Jesus if we're not ready to listen to the Lord of the Sabbath and do what he says. So this morning, this week, I'm sending you out with this mission. I want you this week to ask God to show you what it means to work diligently for 6 days. And on the seventh day, enjoy the fruit of that labor as you worship the God who can restore a weary heart. This is part of the gospel. This is at the heart of the gospel, because in this action, in this obedience to this command, what we find is ourselves standing as creatures under the living God, saying, we will worship you, we will follow your commands, we will rest in your goodness, and we will work to your glory. Sabbath puts everything back where it was meant to be. Let's pray.